Listen up, I'm going to divorce you and marry Margaret. There's a bit of an age gap, but Dad's rich and kind. I'll be happy, so please divorce him for your daughter's sake. Are you listening? I had suspected something was off for a while, but it turned out my husband, Timothy, and my daughter Margaret were actually in a relationship. Marry Margaret? I don't get it. We've been together for a long time. I love her, Timothy said, without a hint of remorse, even proudly revealing his affair with Margaret. If there are two people with the same face, one older and one younger, of course I'd pick the younger one. She looks just like you. So what's the problem? To my disbelief, their relationship had been going on for nearly 20 years. It was unthinkable, but they had been deceiving me all these years. Timothy is 59, Margaret is 38. There's quite an age gap, but seeing them together, it didn't seem to matter. The two of them looked at me, shocked and heartbroken, and laughed as if they were enjoying the situation. I could still somehow compromise when it came to Timothy, as our marriage had already grown cold. But the betrayal of my daughter, Margaret, whom I had raised with so much love, hurt me more than anything. So I decided to reveal a secret I had kept hidden from her until now. Margaret's face turned pale the moment she heard it. My name is Sharon. When I was 30, my husband, who was still healthy and in the prime of his career, tragically passed away in an accident. Even as I grieved, I had to pull myself together for the sake of my only daughter, Margaret. Losing her father suddenly left 10-year-old Margaret anxious and insecure, and I had to work hard to take care of her. I received some financial support from my parents, but I knew I couldn't rely on them forever. So I juggled multiple jobs to earn enough for our living expenses each month. During the day, I worked at a diner, and at night, I worked at a bar. Margaret would stay at a child care center during the day, and at night, she would stay with my parents. I never wanted her to feel lonely, but I had no choice but to sacrifice our time together for work. On the rare days off I had, I would pamper her as much as possible, buying her favorite things and taking her wherever she wanted to go. That was what kept me going. This lifestyle continued for many years, and Margaret eventually turned 18. She got accepted into the university she wanted and was about to start living on her own. Before she left home, she said to me, "Mom, thank you for raising me. Now you can take it easy and enjoy your own life." At that time, I was seeing someone. Timothy was a regular at the bar where I worked. Even after learning that I was a single mother who had lost her husband, he didn't change his attitude towards me. In fact, he admired me for raising my daughter on my own. Margaret's words gave me the push I needed, and I decided to remarry him. When Margaret had settled into her university life and new apartment, I introduced her to Timothy. "Nice to meet you. I'm Margaret, Sharon's daughter." "Nice to meet you, Margaret. Wow, you look just like your mom. Such a beauty." Timothy seemed surprised by how much Margaret and I looked alike. Indeed, now that she was grown up, Margaret looked just like I did when I was younger. "Please take care of Mom," Margaret said, bowing deeply as she made the request. Even though I had made her feel lonely so many times, now she was wishing for my happiness. I was filled with joy, thinking how she had grown into such a kind-hearted person. Then 20 years went by. Timothy steadily climbed the corporate ladder and now held a position as a company executive. Margaret, after graduating from university, began working at a major apparel company. As for me, I quit my job at the bar when I got married, and now I only work during the day. With child-rearing behind me, my life seemed to be going smoothly, at least on the surface. But my relationship with Timothy had grown completely cold. Thinking back, It was right after we got married that I noticed his change in behavior. He had been so kind and cheerful while we were dating, but once we were married, whenever I tried to talk to him, he would often just say, "I'm tired," and ignore me. As he climbed higher in the company and took on more responsibilities, Timothy's overtime and weekend work increased, and we spent even less time together. But strangely, even though he treated me coldly, whenever Margaret came by to visit, Timothy would welcome her warmly. "Oh, Dad, you're so silly." "Really?" "Well, back then." Today again, the two of them were having a conversation that I couldn't quite follow, right in front of me. Seeing Timothy act so differently than he usually did with me, I felt a sense of loneliness and isolation. Ordinarily, it would be a good thing for a daughter and her stepfather to get along, but the way they acted seemed too close, and it made me uneasy. He barely talks to me at all. Was I just being jealous of my daughter? No, anyone could see that there was something odd about the way Timothy and Margaret interacted, and my suspicions would soon be confirmed. "Hey, Sharon, are things going well between you and Timothy?" When I visited my parents' house for the first time in a while, my mom asked me with a complicated expression. I had never confided in her about my troubles with Timothy. I didn't want to make her worry unnecessarily. "Why do you ask all of a sudden?" I wasn't sure whether I should tell you, but, actually, my mom seemed to make up her mind and began to share something with me. At almost 80 years old, she was still quite spry and enjoyed going out shopping on her own. Yesterday, she had taken the train to go shopping in a town a little further away, and there, she had seen Timothy with someone else. Actually, I saw Timothy and Margaret walking arm in arm. I don't want to say this, but there was something more than usual between them. It made me feel uneasy. Wait a minute. That can't be. Timothy is overseas right now, isn't he? There's no way he could be in America. Timothy had been out of the house on a business trip since yesterday. I thought it must have been a mistake or a case of mistaken identity on my mom's part, but she insisted that she was absolutely certain it was Timothy and Margaret. I thought I was seeing things at first, too, but they looked so much alike. "Here, take a look at this." My mom took out her smartphone, the kind designed for seniors, and after pressing a few buttons, she handed it over for me to see. There on the screen was a picture of Timothy and Margaret, walking arm in arm. No way. Why? Sigh. There's no doubt about it. What's going on here? How could my husband, who was supposed to be on a business trip, be walking arm in arm with my daughter, looking so intimate? Legally, they were father and daughter, but there was no blood relation between them, and the way they appeared in the photo didn't seem like a parent-child relationship. It was more like that of a couple. Could it be that the two of them have been hiding something from me? No, that can't be. I felt a chill down my spine as the thought I didn't want to entertain crossed my mind. I had to find out for sure, so I immediately called Timothy to confirm. After a few rings, Timothy picked up, sounding annoyed. "What is it? I'm still out. If it's not urgent, can it wait?" "Hey, where are you right now? You're on a business trip, right?" "Of course. I just got to the airport over here," Timothy responded, but as I listened carefully, the background noise didn't seem to be from overseas. I suddenly heard some conversations that were definitely in English. "Hey, I just heard people speaking English. Are you really overseas?" Well, that's just my colleagues. They're here on the trip too. I'm about to go through immigration. I'm busy, so I'll talk to you later." Timothy stammered and abruptly hung up. His reaction was clearly suspicious. Next, I called Margaret. "Hello. What is it, Mom?" Margaret answered the phone in her usual, calm tone. "Hey, Margaret. Where are you right now?" I asked her the same question I had asked Timothy. Huh, where? I'm out having dinner with a coworker. Why? Margaret's voice remained completely composed. Oh, nothing. Sorry for calling out of the blue, I said before hanging up. Margaret didn't seem to be lying, but I noticed something. The lively music playing in the background when I spoke with Timothy. The same music was playing behind Margaret as well. Just like Mom said, the two of them were at the same place, hiding it from me. I was now certain of it. A few days passed while I was still feeling uneasy, and soon Timothy's 60th birthday was approaching. We had planned to have a birthday party at home, inviting Margaret as well. To be honest, I wasn't keen on seeing Margaret, given my suspicions about their relationship, but I couldn't just cancel the party out of the blue. So I swallowed my feelings and prepared for the celebration. On the day of the party, Margaret arrived as scheduled. Here, this is a present for Dad. You said you liked this one before, right? I found it at a store, so I bought it. I think you'll be happy. Margaret handed a bottle of wine to Timothy. Indeed, it was the brand he liked. Oh, you remembered. I'm really happy. Let's open it and drink it together right away. Hey Sharon, hurry up and get the food ready now. Unlike how he treated Margaret, Timothy addressed me as if I were just the housekeeper. Even after we sat down at the table to start the meal, the two of them continued to show off their close relationship. Hey, when did you two get so close? It feels like there's an unusual intimacy between you. Unable to bear it any longer, I made a sarcastic remark. Timothy smirked. Haha, what's this? Are you getting jealous? All right, I guess it's a good time to tell you the truth. With a smug expression, Timothy pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket and held it up in front of me. It was a divorce application form, already filled out with Timothy's name. I'm tired of living with you. I want a divorce. What? You can't just say something like that out of nowhere. Ignoring my confusion, Timothy and Margaret began to say something unbelievable. Listen carefully. I'm going to divorce you and marry Margaret. Marry Margaret. Why all of a sudden? I don't understand. It's not sudden at all. We've been together for a long time now. I'm in love with Margaret. As I feared, Timothy and Margaret were in a romantic relationship. Timothy confessed their relationship without a hint of shame, and even seemed proud of it. If you have the choice between two people who look the same, but one is older and the other is younger, of course, you'd pick the younger one. Timothy admitted that from the moment he met Margaret, he was more attracted to her than to me. Their relationship had started shortly after we got married. Unbelievably, it had been going on for almost 20 years. It was hard to believe, but that meant they had been deceiving me for all these years. Timothy was 59 and Margaret was 38. Despite the significant age difference, it didn't seem to matter to them at all. Unlike you, who's just a nagging old woman, Margaret is kind. And most importantly, she's young. She looks like you. So it's not a stretch to say I still like you. In fact, you should be happy about this. Sure, there's a big age gap, but Dad is wealthy and kind. I'm going to be happy, so please divorce him for your daughter's sake. Are you listening? Margaret mocked me, seeing me speechless from the shock. Too stunned to even speak. Huh? Well, that's how it is. You'll just have to live out a miserable old age. It can't be helped. Anyone would choose the younger one if they look the same. The two of them laughed, finding amusement in my stunned state. I could handle Timothy. Our marriage had already grown cold, and I had somewhat braced myself for this day to come eventually. But it was the betrayal of my daughter Margaret, whom I had raised as a single mother, juggling multiple jobs, that hurt the most. What you're doing is abnormal. Margaret, Are you really going to betray me and marry this man? Is this really, truly what you want? I pressed Margaret with a question. What? Are you just being sore? I'm sorry for taking your husband. Margaret showed no sign of guilt at all. It seemed that this wasn't just a temporary lapse in judgment. Fine, whatever. Realizing it would be pointless to say anything more, I quietly accepted the divorce papers, signed them in silence, and returned them to Timothy. Once you're done here, get out. This is my and Margaret's room now. You're no longer needed. Timothy's cold words aimed to kick me out, and I held back tears of frustration as I packed my things and left the familiar apartment. Why did I have to go through this? It was painful, but I couldn't do anything about them. The betrayal from the daughter I had raised with so much effort was the hardest to bear. 3 months passed after I was thrown out of the apartment I shared with Timothy, and I returned to my family home. Then Timothy and Margaret suddenly appeared at my door, looking frantic. Hey, Sharon, what's going on? You thieving woman! Timothy yelled at me the moment he saw me. I had an inkling of why he was so angry, but I decided to pretend I didn't know. What do you want? You and I are strangers now, right? How rude to just drop by unannounced. You stole my money. You're the only suspect. Where did you put my savings? Ignoring my words, Timothy accused me of being a thief. What do you mean, coming here and calling me a thief? Isn't that rude? The rent and utility bills haven't been paid, and I've received notices about it. I'm asking where my money went. In fact, I had been the one paying all the rent and utility bills for the apartment where Timothy lived with the money I earned from my job. Timothy had always been a big spender, wasting his entire paycheck without saving a dime. He was living beyond his means, and his income alone was insufficient to cover their expenses. I had mentioned this to him before, but Timothy never listened to me. He had been involved with Margaret even before we got married. He likely thought my concerns were just annoying and never took them seriously. He left all the money management to me, so he had no idea how much savings he actually had. When we divorced, he paid me a substantial amount in compensation, claiming he had more than enough from his income, but that left him with no savings at all. Despite that, he continued to waste money after the divorce. Eventually, it seems his limited savings ran out, and by the time he realized it, his balance was zero. What are you misunderstanding? I wouldn't steal your money. The reason you have none is simply that you kept spending without checking your savings balance. That can't be true. I'm a company executive. You must have embezzled my salary. Give me back my money, you thief. He refused to acknowledge my claims and continued shouting that I had stolen from him. Mom is jealous of our relationship and stole the money to get back at us. It's not too late, so just return it quietly. Margaret chimed in, calling me a thief as well. The two of them were getting quite heated, their voices loud enough for the neighbors to hear. But that was a mistake. Having built this home for decades, my parents had a good relationship with everyone in the neighborhood, since we were well acquainted with our neighbors, who would immediately notice if anything unusual happened. It seems that someone sensed the commotion at our house and decided to call the police. I could hear the siren of a police car approaching from a distance. What, the police? Why? Realizing that the police had arrived, Timothy finally seemed to understand that his actions were wrong, and he began to panic. The police car stopped right in front of the house, and a police officer rang the doorbell, presumably to get details of the situation. No, I just came to ask where the missing money went. We received a report from a neighbor saying they heard threatening loud voices. You weren't just talking, were you? What you were doing was harassment. We'll hear the rest at the station, not here. When Mom invited the police inside, Timothy started making excuses, but the officer told him they'd talk at the station, urging him to get into the police car. Margaret, on the other hand, was trying to escape by slipping out of a window into the backyard, abandoning Timothy. However, she was caught by the officers and was eventually apprehended. I just came to see my mother. Why should I be arrested? Mom, help me, I'm your daughter. Margaret screamed at me, begging for help. She says she is your daughter. Is that true? The officer seemed puzzled, but I shook my head to deny it. No, she is not my daughter. She's my niece. And now she is just an intruder who entered my home without permission and caused trouble. Please, take them away. Margaret's expression became one of shock. Wait, what? Mom, you're saying I'm not your daughter? And that I'm your niece? What do you mean, Mom? I had intended to keep the truth from her forever. It was a secret I planned to take to my grave, but I could no longer hold back. When Margaret, with her selfish actions, carelessly hurt others. The truth is, Margaret was not my child. She was the daughter of my twin sister, Nicole. Nicole had been rebellious since her school days, and she ran away from home with a man who had approached her in the city. Later, after giving birth to a child, Nicole was abandoned by the man and returned to her parents' home. However, they told her, "You're disowned," and refused to take her back. Nicole planned to place her child in an institution, but I, who was already married and struggling to have children of my own, felt pity for Margaret and decided to take her in. It was not surprising that Margaret and I looked alike since we were aunt and niece. I went against my parents' objections and decided to raise Margaret in Nicole's place. Why didn't you tell me this before? Help me, Mom. Margaret kept shouting at me as she was forced into the police car, but I ignored her cries and watched as both of them were taken away. The two were sternly warned by the police for their disruptive behavior, and after a brief questioning, they were finally released. Margaret seemed deeply shocked after being told the truth that I was not her real mother. After she was released, I confessed everything I had kept hidden to Margaret. I told her that her real mother abandoned her and had since disappeared without a trace, and that even I did not know who her father was. Margaret hung her head, looking dejected. No, it can't be true that I have another mother. I'm afraid it is true. I have always treated you as my own daughter and raised you with care. But maybe I was too lenient with you. Beside Margaret, Timothy was also hanging his head, looking equally ashamed. The police had pointed out that the missing savings were not because I had embezzled them, but rather because Timothy had recklessly spent without checking his account balance. I'm sorry for everything that's happened. So could you lend us some money, even just a little? We were husband and wife, weren't we? Please, even if I'm not your daughter, we're still blood-related family. Right. How can you just abandon your family in trouble? Despite everything, the two began demanding money again, but my parents and I firmly turned them away from the house. From now on, don't show your faces to us again. You are not family to us anymore. Having been coldly rejected, the two then tried to borrow money from Timothy's family and friends. But Timothy's reputation had already been tarnished as the man who betrayed his wife and had an affair with her daughter, and no one was willing to lend them any money. Realizing they had no choice but to live within their means, the two finally started living in a small apartment. However, one day, a woman in her 60s suddenly visited Margaret. Margaret, you've grown into such a fine adult. It's your mom. I'm in a tight spot and need your help. Margaret and Timothy tried to chase away this unfamiliar woman, wondering what she was saying out of nowhere, but she forcefully pushed her way into the apartment, saying, "Hey, Your real mom is in big trouble. As a daughter, you should help me." The woman, wearing makeup that made her look unnaturally young, and a miniskirt that didn't suit her age, was Nicole, my twin sister, who had abandoned Margaret long ago and disappeared without a trace. Disowned by our parents, Nicole had drifted from one bad man to another without ever holding a steady job. And now she was drowning in debt and struggling to survive. Nicole had managed to find Margaret's apartment because my parents and I had given her the address. Recently, Nicole had visited our parents' house for the first time in decades, trying to demand money from them because she was in desperate need. That's when I seized the opportunity and suggested she rely on her biological daughter, giving her Margaret and Timothy's apartment address. "How dare you? You abandoned me, and now you call yourself my mother. Leave." "What? I'm not going anywhere. I'm your real mom, so of course it's your duty to support me." The two began shouting at each other, arguing bitterly. Despite Margaret's resistance, Nicole eventually forced her way into the apartment, making herself at home with Margaret and Timothy. Timothy ended up using most of his retirement money to pay off debts, and now he also had to take care of Nicole. After retirement, Timothy couldn't cover living expenses without working part-time at construction sites and security companies, forcing his aging body to earn some income. Margaret reluctantly took a job at a bar, but all of her earnings were taken by Nicole. The wages both of them earned from their jobs were being siphoned off by Nicole. Eventually, it seems that Timothy, fed up with his hard-earned money being spent on the constant quarrels between Margaret and her mother Nicole, disappeared without a trace. Left behind, Margaret was forced to live with her mother, Nicole. Most likely, Margaret will continue to be exploited by her mother for the rest of her life. I can't say I don't feel sorry for her, but at this point, I've decided that this is for the best. As for me, I recently met a man through a hobby, a widower who lost his wife a few years ago and now lives alone. I haven't decided yet if I want to remarry, but we have a good relationship, visiting each other's homes and enjoying our time together freely. He is skilled in the kitchen and often cooks my favorite meatloaf for me. It's been a long time since I've felt this content. When I'm with him, time seems to flow gently, and I can't help but smile. As I take things one step at a time, I feel that this simple, ordinary life might be the happiest way to live.
Mary handed me the letter she had read at the wedding reception. I wasn't so dense that I couldn't read the room and make a joke at a time like this. I needed to say something serious to Mary.
"Mary, thank you for being born. I'm sure you wanted to show this to Dad too."
Mary's personality had completely changed after my husband, Tom, disappeared 15 years ago. Until then, she had been a bright and curious child, but she became timid and withdrawn. It must have had something to do with her father's disappearance. When Mary heard my words, she suddenly broke down in tears. I thought she was just overwhelmed with emotion, but something seemed off. She grabbed my hand while crying. Her grip was strong enough to leave a bruise. "Mom, I'm sorry. There's something I've been keeping from you." I had a bad feeling about this. Dad was betraying us. There was a clear look of hatred in her eyes. I felt the color drain from my face. "What do you mean?" I hurried home and desperately dug up the spot Mary had specified. The shovel hit something. There was a cookie tin buried in the dirt. I shouldn't open this. A sudden fear gripped me. But I couldn't let Mary carry this burden alone. Don't turn away from the truth, I told myself as I opened the tin. Our meeting came suddenly. It happened in the spring when I was 28. "Sarah, this is Tom, the new employee. The young man introduced by my manager, Lien, greeted me.
Teach him the ropes starting today.
With that, Lien quickly headed to the conference room. I'm Sarah. I'll start by teaching you the basics. If there's anything you don't understand, just ask. He kept staring at the name tag on my chest. Are you listening? It was Tom, right? Just as I was about to scold him, he flashed me a friendly smile and said something outrageous.
Sarah. What a beautiful name.
I was taken aback, not expecting to hear something like that from a new employee I had just met, who was also 10 years younger than me. I'm sorry. I guess I said something embarrassing, didn't I? He said, looking more embarrassed than I felt as he sat down at the desk next to mine. When I glanced at his profile, I noticed his ears were bright red. Maybe he wasn't a bad person after all. However, I couldn't help but feel uneasy that his first words to me, his supposed mentor, were those. Would he actually do his job properly? Perhaps it would be best to teach him about his attitude towards his senior colleagues. But my worries turned out to be unfounded. Tom quickly learned everything I taught him, and his friendly personality proved effective in winning over the sales team. He was so dedicated to his work that before I knew it, I had come to recognize Tom's abilities. And a year later, when Tom landed a big contract on his own, we decided to celebrate together over dinner. It's all thanks to your great teaching, Sarah. You don't let your achievements go to your head at all. Although my first impression of him wasn't the best, by that time I had grown comfortable being around Tom.
But now that you've become so capable at your job, you're definitely going to get even busier.
He would surely surpass me in no time. Tom reacted to my voice, which was so soft that I couldn't tell if he heard me or not, as I felt a sense of loneliness. Even if that happens, will you still go out to eat with me from time to time like this? The redness in Tom's ears wasn't just from the alcohol. Somehow, I had a premonition. But I couldn't give a straight answer to Tom's feelings, who was 10 years younger than me.
By then, you'll be going out drinking with more important people, not me.
I tried to brush it off, but Tom's eyes were serious.
Sarah, I'm serious.
Tom leaned forward. After a few seconds of staring into each other's eyes, I nodded. It wasn't that I was swept away by Tom's momentum. Somewhere inside, I was also drawn to Tom. Tom, the man who would later become my husband. We continued dating steadily, and we got married when I turned 30. After that, we were blessed with a daughter, and the three of us lived a happy life. Yes, that's how it was supposed to be. I'll never forget, it was the spring when Mary was 5 years old. After putting Mary on the kindergarten shuttle bus, I was chatting with a fellow mom from the neighborhood when my cell phone rang. Hello, Sarah? It was a call from Lien, my former boss, whom I hadn't seen since I quit my job before Mary was born, except in Tom's stories.
Lien, it's been a while. Tom is always grateful for your guidance.
Lien interrupted my greeting and asked me a question.
I'm glad you sound well. By the way, I can't get in touch with Tom. Do you know anything about that?
What? Tom was supposed to be on a business trip to Hong Kong since 3 days ago. According to Lien, there was no business trip, and Tom hadn't come to work since Monday of this week.
Anyway, try to contact him from your end too, Sarah.
With that, Lien hung up the phone. Recently, Tom had been complaining about the increase in business trips. Each time, I would console and encourage him. Talking to you really puts my mind at ease, Sarah. It's like being enveloped in warmth. Thank you, always, he would say. We had even gotten excited together about this long business trip, saying it was because he was highly regarded and sure to get a promotion. On Monday, Tom had taken a day off to pack for the business trip starting the next day. Where on earth had he gone? After hanging up with Leanne, I ended my gossip session and went home to try calling Tom's cell phone. But it seemed to be turned off. This had never happened before, where I couldn't get in touch with Tom. Could he have been involved in an accident or incident somewhere? Suddenly overcome with anxiety, I called every contact I had on my cell phone. Tom's parents' house, his siblings, every friend I knew of. But no one knew of Tom's whereabouts. From then on, days so painful that I don't even want to remember them continued. At the suggestion of my in-laws, I filed a missing person report for Tom, but no leads turned up at all. I swallowed my shame, asked Leanne, and returned to my old workplace, working as if to fill the hole Tom had left. But at the same time, Mary's smiles started to decrease. Even with reduced working hours, it was a completely different life than before. From Mary's perspective, her father had disappeared, and even the time she spent with her mother had decreased. I understood Mary's loneliness all too painfully, but we had to overcome it together. For my part, I felt uncomfortable being treated as a pitiful woman who had been abandoned by her husband and was now cleaning up his mess at work. Only my longtime colleagues treated me normally, but I could see sympathy in the depths of their eyes. I felt like I was being pushed to the brink mentally, but I gritted my teeth. In front of Mary, I tried to act as cheerful as possible, so as not to let her feel any anxiety or loneliness. And I wanted to give Mary a life where she lacked for nothing. That was my sole focus. When Mary entered elementary school and we had gotten used to life with just the two of us, I made a certain request to my manager.
As long as it's not too much for you, Sarah.
Leanne was probably worried about me, but at the time, I had lost faith in everyone, so I could only thank him formally. And so I started an online shop as a side job. Has it really been 15 years since then? I muttered to myself while gazing at the cherry blossoms starting to bloom.
Mom? What's wrong?
Mary, who had been walking ahead of me, turned around. The image of Mary in my memories overlapped with her current appearance.
Don't tell me you're still nervous, Mom?
Mary laughed mischievously. Of course not. I wasn't nervous from the start. I joked back, and we walked side by side, laughing. Today was a family meeting with Mary and her fiancé's family. Mary, now fully grown, had met her fiancé at the city hall where she started working after graduating from college.
If you were going to go to college and work as a public servant anyway, you could have waited a little longer to get married.
Mary was only 23 years old. I had accidentally muttered this on the day she first introduced him to me, but Mary said,
"You married Dad on instinct too, didn't you, Mom?"
It dredged up unpleasant memories from my past and left me with complicated feelings, but she was right. No matter who says what, I am going to marry this person. Mary's personality of charging straight ahead once she made a decision was definitely something she got from me.
If it seems like it's not working out, hurry back home, okay? That's not going to happen.
We enjoyed having conversations like that over and over until the wedding day. And a few months later, Mary's wedding took place. I watched from a distant seat as Mary received countless words of blessing. As the reception was coming to an end, it was time for the bride to read a letter. I had told Mary that I didn't want her to do it because it was embarrassing. Mary had also said she wouldn't do it. I couldn't show tears in front of so many people. No matter how much sympathy or comfort I received after Tom disappeared, I had managed not to cry in front of others until now. I was determined to play the role of a strong mother who wouldn't cry no matter what, until the very end. With that resolve in my heart, I took the stage as prompted. To my beloved Mom. Mary began reading the letter. Starting from the days when Tom was still with us, to the loneliness she felt when the time she spent with me decreased after Tom's disappearance. How she eventually started helping out a lot, wanting to support me as I threw myself into work, and her rebellious phase during her teenage years. Her gratitude for being able to live a life without any hardships through high school and college. All the events written in the letter, and even more so, the ordinary days we spent together felt like they had happened just yesterday. I absolutely wouldn't cry. I thought I would catch Mary's eye and laugh together like always, but at that moment, Mary's voice stopped. I looked over at Mary and saw her crying, dressed in a beautiful gown. Seeing her like that again, she looked so beautiful, almost like a different person. Mary, who was always young and forever a child in my mind. But once this day ends, a different life from before will begin. When did she become such a lovely and wonderful woman? I could vividly remember everything until now, but Mary, crying as she read the letter to me, seemed to have gone to a place beyond my reach. Suddenly, tears spilled from my eyes. And they kept flowing, one after another. They were tears of pride for Mary, who had become an adult, wishing for her eternal happiness, mixed with the loneliness that would likely come from being on my own from now on. After the reception ended, I headed to the bride's waiting room. Mary, who had been resting for a bit, ran over to me. "I can't believe you cried, Mom." We had lived together until now, but no matter how painful it was, I had never shown tears in front of Mary. Mary seemed surprised that I, who was like that, had cried. "I told you not to read any letters." To hide my embarrassment, I pretended to be angry on purpose. But Mary, who would usually play along with me at times like this, had a solemn expression on her face. And Mary handed me the letter she had read at the reception. I wasn't so dense that I couldn't read the room and make a joke at a time like this. I needed to say something serious to Mary. "Mary, thank you for being born. Your dad would have wanted to see this too." Mary's personality had completely changed after Tom disappeared. Until then, she had been a bright and curious child, but she became timid and withdrawn. It must have had something to do with her father's disappearance. She started wondering if she was an unwanted child, if her father had disappeared because of her. To avoid being seen as unwanted or unnecessary, she began to gauge people's reactions and moods first. After I noticed this, I showered Mary with love so she wouldn't feel anxious, and by the time she became an adult, she had returned to being a cheerful child, but today was a special day for Mary, and I didn't want her to have a gloomy face on a day like this, nor did I want to let that happen. And I wanted her to look to the future rather than being trapped in the past. Having Mary born was the greatest happiness for me too. The father in Mary's memories must have been eagerly awaiting this day as well. That was the one thing I absolutely had to convey to her. However, when Mary heard my words, she suddenly broke down in tears. I thought she was just overwhelmed with emotion, but something seemed off. She grabbed my hand while crying. Her grip was strong enough to leave a bruise. "Mom, I'm sorry. There's something I've been keeping from you." I had a bad feeling about this. I didn't want to hear what she had to say next. But my wish was not granted. Mary slowly spoke the truth. "Dad was betraying us." There was a clear look of hatred in her eyes. I felt the color drain from my face. "What do you mean?" Even if that were true, how did Mary know about it? Of course, Mary also understood that Tom had disappeared, but even I didn't know where he had gone or why he had disappeared. "I had been debating when to tell you for a long time. But I didn't want you to find out that secret alone after I left." Apparently, that secret was buried in the flower bed in our backyard. "I'm sorry for not being able to tell you until today." At that moment, the groom entered the waiting room after finishing changing his clothes. He looked surprised to see Mary crying in anguish, feeling sorry for me.
I understand. It's all right.
After briefly explaining the situation to him and entrusting Mary to his care, I dashed out of the room. It was a 20-minute drive from the hotel where the wedding was held to our house. Without worrying about my appearance, I ran to the parking lot and jumped into the car. The car's speed felt slower than usual. I tried to calm myself down many times as I grew irritated, but it didn't work. Even after getting out of the car, I kept running until I reached the house. Despite already being out of breath, I desperately dug up the spot Mary had specified without taking a break. The shovel hit something. A cookie tin was buried in the soil. I shouldn't open this. I suddenly felt frightened. But I couldn't let Mary bear this burden alone. Don't look away from the truth. Telling myself that, I opened the tin. Inside were several photos. They showed Tom with a woman wearing glamorous makeup. As I looked through them one by one, photos of the two entangled in a lewd manner appeared. I involuntarily averted my eyes. Was this the reason Mary had said Tom disappeared? For a while, I couldn't move, crouched in the garden.
Why in the world would he have something like this?
The night wind, still cold, enveloped me. The next day, I asked Mary, who had returned home, for the truth.
I found them in Dad's desk.
That desk we had kept in the house for a while after Tom disappeared. I had also thoroughly searched it for any clues.
I searched that desk too.
Still shaken, my tone sounded somewhat accusatory towards Mary. Mary explained the situation with an apologetic look on her face. When Tom disappeared, she saw me searching through his desk and became convinced there must be something there. She didn't know what it was, but she desperately searched through the desk. And in the back of the bottom drawer, she found an envelope.
I thought if I had that, I could help you, Mom.
When Mary opened the envelope, those photos came out. Young as she was, Mary couldn't understand what they were doing in the photos, but she said it made her feel awful. Feeling that she shouldn't show these photos to me, she hid them in a cookie tin where she kept her toys.
I had intended to keep it hidden from you forever, Mom, but I was worried about what would happen if you found it on your own after I left.
It was too big a worry for a child to bear alone. To think that Mary had been hiding this all along. I thought I had been protecting Mary, but it was the opposite. Was I the one being protected by Mary?
I'm sorry. Mary.
I was at a loss for words. At the same time as I felt sorry for Mary, anger towards Tom welled up inside me. How could he leave such cruel evidence to the family he abandoned? Anger surged through me at Tom's irresponsibility. Nothing will come from letting my emotions take over with anger. No, in this case, I should properly put an end to it. I took the photos and headed to a detective agency. I had gone through so much trouble trying to find Tom's whereabouts. But based on those photos, the detectives were able to track down Tom's location with ease. From the building in the photo, they found a high-rise apartment towering in front of a certain station, staked it out, and confirmed Tom and the woman coming and going. They even pinpointed the room number for me. They said the couple often used food delivery services, so I decided to disguise myself as a delivery person and enter the apartment building. When I rang the intercom for the autolock, I heard a familiar voice. After giving the name of the delivery company, the automatic door opened with a "come in." The elevator kept ascending to the upper floors. My heart was pounding and I felt nauseous. If I was going to turn back, there was still time. I asked myself over and over, but I made my way to the door of the room where Tom and the woman were supposed to be. With trembling hands, I pressed the doorbell. I readjusted my mask and pulled my hat down low. "Yes?" I heard that familiar voice again. "Delivery." I was so nervous I misspoke without thinking. What delivery? They'd definitely be suspicious. But I couldn't say anything more. What should I do? Just as I thought about running away, I heard the sound of the front door being unlocked.
Did Betty order something?
I could never forget the face that appeared from behind the door. My memories were only from when he was in his 20s, but the man who came out was undoubtedly my husband, Tom. He was giving me that same friendly smile as back then.
Ah.
A sound slipped out, but Tom didn't seem to notice yet.
Huh? Where's the delivery?
Tom checked around me, as I only had a shoulder bag. Then,
What? What's wrong, Tom?
from behind Tom, a nearly half-naked woman poked her head out. It was her. Betty, 49 years old. Apparently, her family was wealthy, and she was living a celebrity lifestyle here. I recalled the information I had learned from the detectives. She was the woman who had been supporting Tom since his disappearance. Seeing the woman's face, I regained my composure and anger. I took off my mask and hat and stated my name to the two of them, who were stunned. I'm Sarah, the wife of Tom over there. After staring at my face for a while, Tom let out a surprised cry.
Ah!
And fled into the back of the room.
Oh my!
As I watched Tom's retreating figure, Betty stood in front of me, blocking my way.
How dare you claim to be the wife of a man you haven't seen in years?
Betty crossed her arms, a confident smile on her face. But I couldn't back down here.
I should be the one saying that. It seems my husband has been in your care all this time,
I said with a laugh. Betty then stared at me from head to toe without saying anything.
Can you explain what's been going on?
When I asked, as if to shake off her gaze, she told me a story similar to what I had heard from the detectives. One time, when Tom was at a bar on a business trip, Betty took a liking to him and brought him to this apartment, which was also her villa. After that, Tom returned to the house where Mary and I were waiting and went about his daily life as if nothing had happened, but he started frequently visiting Betty. Eventually, captivated by Betty's wealth and the time he was spoiled, he had been here since leaving us that day. Betty gave Tom a luxurious life without having to work and had spoiled him rotten. Indeed, Tom, who ran away at the sight of me, was like a puppy. He was no longer the dignified and responsible Tom of those days.
So, did you come to get Tom back?
Watching Betty talk without any shame irritated me. I wanted to leave this place as soon as possible. I decided to convey only the main points to Betty.
No, I don't need him anymore at this point. There's just one last thing I want to do as his wife.
Betty tilted her head.
I'll be claiming compensation from my husband Tom, and you, Betty.
Betty nodded without changing her expression.
How much? I'll give you whatever amount you desire.
She provoked me with an upward glance, but the moment she heard my next words, Betty turned pale.
I'm sorry. I'll have to consult with your husband about this.
Leaving those words behind, I left the place. I knew from the detective agency's investigation that Betty had a husband. Apparently, it was a political marriage with Betty, but if this got out, it would be a big problem. It was unknown how much impact this fact would have on Betty, but surprisingly, the effect was outstanding.
Don't tell my husband!
Betty's scream echoed through the hallway. But I headed towards the elevator without looking back. Betty, who was almost half naked, didn't chase after me so far as to rush out into the hallway. Inside the elevator heading to the ground floor, I let out a deep breath. And when I went outside, I stretched grandly. Ah! That felt great. People on the street were looking at me, but I couldn't care less. Looking up at the clear blue sky, I headed to Mary's new home. Through a lawyer, I was able to dissolve my marriage with Tom. Of course, I demanded compensation from Tom and Betty. Betty's husband and parents chose to cut ties with her, apparently. Despite being married as the daughter of a good family, she had been seducing a younger man using her parents' assets. If word of this got out, it would be detrimental to their family business, as they were a prominent family. Although Betty had shown confidence in paying the amount of compensation I desired, more than the amount ordered in court had been transferred to me. Surely, money had moved not only to me but to other places as well. And Tom, who was abandoned by Betty after she was cut off from her family and husband, was nowhere to be found. He had disappeared again, even though he still had compensation payments to make to me. But I had no desire to know his whereabouts.
Mom, is this everything we need to dispose of?
Mary was carrying luggage out of the room. She was helping me as I had decided to let go of this house, which was too big for one person, and move.
That's right. Shall we take a little break?
We chatted while drinking iced tea together.
You know, Mom, there's something else I've been hiding.
I nearly spit out my iced tea.
I don't need any more of that.
But Mary's face was serene, and her hand was placed on her belly.
Could it be?
Yes, a new life was growing in Mary's belly.
And there's one more thing. I saw Dad the other day.
Mary began to speak matter-of-factly. Apparently, she had seen him walking around in a shabby state while on a trip with her husband. It was a place that took 3 hours by car from here.
He must be struggling. But I didn't feel like I wanted to help him. Rather, I couldn't believe that person was my dad.
The Tom in Mary's memories must be shining. As if to shake off that topic, I stood up. That's the end of that story. Back to cleaning. Mary, throw out everything you don't need. If only memories and recollections could be discarded if they weren't needed. With those thoughts, I continued cleaning the room. And then, 2 years passed. Mary and her family came to visit this house where I now lived, doubling as my office.
You seem to be thriving as always, Grandma.
My tottering granddaughter walked towards me with outstretched hands. And I remembered when Mary was little. Dark memories immediately resurfaced, but I brushed them aside. Something far more important than painful memories from the past was right in front of me now. There was no time to dwell on unnecessary things. After all, from now on, I still had to make many fun and bright memories. Dad stumbled awkwardly but managed to walk down the aisle. He looked Robert, the groom, straight in the eye.
Take care of my daughter.
Dad's eyes clearly conveyed the message, even if he didn't speak the words.
I promise to protect Nancy for the rest of my life.
Robert understood Dad's feelings and responded with determination.
I wish Mom could see me in my wedding dress from heaven.
I lost Mom to cancer when I was in elementary school. Since then, Dad raised me and my 2 sisters as a single father. The wedding reception went smoothly, and finally, I read a letter to my parents-in-law.
Daniel and Karen have always been kind to me. I lost my mom to illness when I was young. Because of that, I might have always longed for a mother in my heart. You too have welcomed me warmly, like your own daughter.
At that moment, the lights went out, and the entire room was plunged into darkness. Thinking it was a technical issue, I looked up to see the doors open, revealing a bright light and a smiling woman's face.
Mom.
My name is Nancy, a 31-year-old office worker about to get married. I lost my mom when I was young. When I was in 3rd grade, Mom was diagnosed with cancer. At that time, I couldn't grasp the gravity of a parent getting sick. I just thought it was a bit lonely because the house felt quieter than usual when I got home from school. Dad ran a long-established auto repair shop in our town. He would leave the work to his young employees and take me to visit Mom in the hospital every day.
You came here again? Thank you. How was school?
Mom's gentle face was always the same, even in the hospital. I learned much later that Mom was undergoing chemotherapy, losing her hair, and it was painful just to sit up. Still, she forced a smile to keep me from worrying. Dad would inform Mom ahead of our visits. "We're coming." So, Mom would put on a wig and lightly apply makeup before we arrived. In my memories, Mom was always beautiful and bright. "Mom, get well soon. We have a class visit next week. I hope you're better by then."
Yes, and you be good with your sisters and don't fight with your friends.
"Of course. I have homework, so I need to go now." I thought these ordinary exchanges would continue forever, but 2 weeks later, Mom passed away. Dad was so busy with the funeral arrangements and relatives that he had no time to grieve.
Why is everyone wearing black clothes?
Mom is sleeping a lot. Why won't she wake up? My twin sisters asked innocently, and I didn't know how to answer, so I remained silent. From that day on, whenever Dad was busy with work, I tried to act as a substitute mom for my sisters. Despite his exhaustion from work, Dad would always say,
"Is there anything I can do?" "I'll do anything."
He took on the house chores willingly. After washing his dirty socks by hand, Dad looked at Mom's portrait and said,
"Mom had it tough every day. I realize that now."
But I couldn't bring myself to smile at Dad's efforts. When I was in junior high, Dad tried to iron my uniform with clumsy hands.
"I can do it myself. Don't touch it."
I snatched the iron from him. On my birthday, Dad made beef stew.
"Don't bother. Mom's beef stew was never this bad."
I ran to my room, ignoring my hunger. Later, I snuck out to check on Dad and saw him eating the stew he made. "Barbara, what should I do?" Dad asked Mom's portrait, his back looking heartbreakingly small. Still, I couldn't face Dad openly. Every time Dad forced a smile, it painfully reminded me that Mom was gone. Since Mom passed, I never saw Dad shed a tear. Watching Dad struggle while pretending to be strong was unbearable, and I started avoiding him. In high school, I used my sisters as an excuse to cut off social interactions with friends. Eventually, no one invited me anymore, and my only company was my sisters.
"This is fine. I'm fine with this."
Without relying on others or interacting with them, I began to believe it was normal to do everything alone. After high school, I gave up college to help with the family finances and got a job at a local company. "Sorry. If I earned more, you wouldn't have to struggle, Nancy." Dad lamented his inadequacies as a father. "I didn't get a job for you, Dad." I replied coldly, avoiding proper conversation with him. Though I felt guilty, I couldn't muster the courage to face Dad. 10 years passed, and my sisters found jobs. By then, I was 30. Colleagues teased me.
"Any plans to get married?" "I gave up on that long ago."
I always laughed it off. The only man who invited me to dinner was Robert, a colleague who joined the company at the same time.
"I've been interested in you since I started working here. Thinking about you at work keeps me motivated and performing well. Please go out with me, with marriage in mind."
After dinner, Robert's sudden confession surprised me. But it also made me happy. I had only ever thought about my sisters and never seriously considered my own life. I never imagined my heart could flutter like this. The excitement lasted for days, and I couldn't sleep. At work, seeing Robert distracted me.
"Hey, you're not working."
And my colleagues noticed my distraction. I confided my confusing feelings to my sisters.
Nancy! You finally fell in love.
Who's the guy? Is he handsome?
Tell us more about him.
They eagerly probed, and I was taken aback.
He must be handsome. Yeah, your face hasn't stopped smiling. You didn't realize, did you?
With their observation, I realized my feelings for Robert were love. I accepted his proposal. 6 months later, after a fireworks show, Robert proposed again.
I look forward to our future together.
I tearfully accepted.
Mom, is it okay for me to be happy? To live my own life?
I gazed at my engagement ring under the night sky, reassuring myself of my happiness. As fall deepened and the leaves turned, I nervously visited Robert's parents.
Relax. My parents aren't as strict as you think.
Robert's parents were both public servants. I took a deep breath to calm myself.
Are you Nancy? Oh my.
I see. You're Robert's fiancée. This must be fate. After my introduction, my parents-in-law looked at me with shining eyes.
Hey, stop staring at her. It's rude. Sorry. We're just thrilled to have such a wonderful woman with Robert. Forgive us, Nancy.
Indeed.
Robert inherited my non-existent charm with women. It's a miracle someone as lovely as you would marry him. Enough with the jokes, you too. You're embarrassing me.
As Robert said, his parents were friendly and easygoing. I felt I could get along well with them. Then the doorbell rang, and Karen went to answer it.
They're here.
The house became lively as more people arrived. Oh, you're Robert's future wife? An older woman, who looked like Daniel, entered.
Sorry to startle you. This is my sister Linda.
Daniel apologized with a sigh. Soon, more relatives filled the room, making it crowded. This is Anthony, a university professor. And Jennifer, whose husband was elected to the city council last month. What was supposed to be a greeting turned into a family gathering. Seeing me overwhelmed, Robert gently held my hand.
Are you okay? We can rest in the next room if you need. No way. Everyone took time off to meet you. The main guest can't leave. How rude.
The relatives laughed loudly, and Robert sighed.
Oh, speaking of manners, women must have children after marriage.
How old are you?
I'm 30.
Oh dear. If you're planning to have kids, you should hurry.
Linda, stop it. Imposing your views isn't right these days.
Daniel complained with a grim expression. That's not true.
All of my relatives had kids in their 20s. If Nancy wants to be accepted as part of this family, she needs to show results. Understood. I'll do my best.
Linda, leading the relatives, said whatever they pleased and left with satisfied expressions. On their way out, I'm sorry, Nancy. Robert apologized. Were you surprised? I didn't nod or shake my head, but inside I was bewildered.
You'll have to deal with people like them more often, but they're not bad at heart. So, when we get married, I want you to live here with my parents. I understand. I intended to do that when I agreed to marry you.
I forced a smile to hide my true feelings. From that day on, I started visiting my in-laws' house every weekend for wedding planning, trying to fit in with the family. Each time, the relatives would come over in what they called bridal training.
There will be many city council members among the guests. Make sure to think carefully about the food and wedding favors.
Don't be stingy with money. Understood? They spoke to me as if scolding an unruly child. When Christmas came, far more relatives than I had anticipated showed up at my in-laws' house every day. Nancy, you know this, right?
Think of this as the final test before marrying Robert.
The morning after Christmas, I felt a bit feverish but still took the initiative to serve and help with the food. No matter how hard I tried to act before being told, Linda and the others never praised me. Even so, I wanted to be accepted as a member of the family as soon as possible. Reflecting on the days I spent taking care of my younger sisters during my youth, I kept telling myself, I can endure this much. However, as I was about to head to the kitchen to serve coffee to new visitors, my vision blurred, and I found myself staring at the wooden ceiling.
Nancy! Get a hold of yourself! Hey, Nancy has collapsed. Oh my goodness! Robert, call an ambulance right away!
My parents-in-law's frantic voices gradually faded away. When I woke up, I saw the white ceiling of a hospital room. Nancy? Oh, thank goodness, you're awake, Karen said, tearing up by my side.
What happened to me?
I couldn't immediately understand why I had been taken to the hospital.
It seems you were mentally exhausted. The doctor said you should recover soon if you rest for a while.
I see. I'm sorry for causing trouble. Ashamed of troubling my parents-in-law, I tried to get up.
No. Rest now. Absolutely no pushing yourself.
Karen, speaking like a scolding mom, gently pushed me back onto the bed.
Why did you push yourself so hard? If you were feeling unwell, you should have said so.
I wanted to be accepted as a member of the family as soon as possible. But I guess I'm not doing very well, am I? Hearing this, Karen started to say something, but then the hospital room door opened. Nancy, are you awake? How do you feel? I'm really sorry for causing trouble.
What are you talking about? You're not causing trouble. Just think about yourself for now.
Thank you. The warmth of my parents-in-law's words touched my heart.
Earlier, I firmly told Linda to stop meddling in our family matters. She's very sorry now.
Family.
That's right. Nancy, you're already a part of our family. There's no need to worry.
Daniel smiled. Exactly. To us, you are like a real daughter. Yet you seem so formal with us. I'm sorry. That's it. You always become so formal with us. It seems you feel like there's a barrier between us. You're right. I'm sorry. I'll be more careful.
There you go again.
Karen smiled wryly, as if exasperated. Just then, Robert came in.
All the relatives have left. They've all realized they put too much pressure on Nancy.
As I listened to Robert talk about Linda and the other relatives, my heavy heart began to feel lighter. They're really not as bad as you think, Nancy.
Yes. I'll try to get along with everyone as soon as possible. To do that, Nancy, be honest with your feelings. Don't be too formal with us. We're family. That's right, Nancy. From now on, think of us as your real family. Feel free to consult with us about anything. Don't try to handle everything on your own.
Moved by my parents-in-law's warm words, I couldn't hold back my tears. Karen gently hugged me, stroking my head like a real daughter.
Karen, please teach me how to make your delicious soup.
When I was discharged, I decided to treat Karen like a real mom.
Of course. I'll teach you our family's secret recipe. Let's make it together.
With Daniel, I was initially unsure how to interact, not having faced a real dad before.
Relax and take it easy. Think of me as Karen's servant.
Daniel joked with a smile, making me less nervous. When Linda came over and saw me, she asked, "How are you feeling? Are you okay now?" Showing genuine concern.
Thank you for your concern. I'm okay now.
Good. That's a relief. Linda patted her chest in genuine relief, though she didn't apologize directly as she was leaving.
Use this.
She handed me a discount voucher for a nearby cafe. As Robert said, deep down, everyone was kind-hearted. After finishing the soup and cleaning up, my parents-in-law called me to their room. When I entered, there were several cardboard boxes containing old photo albums.
Oh, here it is. Karen, look, everyone's so young. Nancy, take a look.
Daniel opened an album and showed me an old, yellowed photo. In it were a young Daniel and Karen, and to my surprise, I let out a voice of surprise. "What?" To two unexpected people. "Is that my dad and mom?" I exclaimed, recognizing their faces.
Yes, that's your dad and mom.
How? How did you know each other?
Daniel and your dad, David, were classmates in middle school. They drifted apart due to work after getting married.
Wow. That's so unexpected.
And now I can tell you, it was me who introduced Barbara to David, who wasn't good with women.
Karen laughed, reminiscing. Daniel pulled out a rusty cookie tin from the closet. "These are all letters David wrote to us." The envelopes and letters had faded with time, but the familiar handwriting was undoubtedly my dad's. The letters dated from just after my mom's passing to just after my engagement to Robert, totaling over 50. I never knew Dad wrote so many letters. I was surprised by this side of Dad, who I thought wasn't much of a letter writer. 1 week before Barbara passed, we visited her. She was instructing David on cooking, cleaning, and laundry.
I never knew that.
David had always left the housework to Barbara, focusing on his job. He was frantically taking notes from Barbara. Karen's voice, mixed with laughter, turned somber. After Barbara passed, David struggled. "Nancy, he felt you wouldn't open up to him."
He was always clumsy. After Barbara died, he must have been worried about how to connect with his daughters. But Nancy, believe this, David always put you and your sisters first.
Dad. I'm sorry. I knew Dad had tried hard for us. But I couldn't be honest with him, always rebelling. The latest letter simply said, in large letters, "Take care of my daughter." Beside the words was a smudge.
David must have been so happy. Imagining you in your wedding dress, he must have written that letter with tears in his eyes.
I thought from the bottom of my heart how grateful I was to be born as Dad and Mom's daughter. And then summer came, and the wedding day arrived. According to my sisters, Dad was so nervous from the morning that he couldn't eat breakfast. Dad kept looking at Mom's portrait and repeatedly prayed, "Please let the wedding go smoothly."
Dad, that outfit doesn't suit you at all.
Is it your size? Have you gained a little weight?
Your pants aren't going to rip during the ceremony, are they? Enough, you guys. I need to go to the restroom.
Watching Dad and my sisters interact, I casually remembered when Mom was still healthy. If only there was one more person here, how wonderful it would have been if Mom could be here too. I wish I could have shown my wedding dress to Mom in heaven. The ceremony began, and Dad, with a hesitant step that almost made him stumble, managed to walk down the aisle. He looked straight into Robert, the groom's eyes. "Take care of my daughter." Though he didn't voice it, Dad's eyes clearly said it.
"I promise to protect Nancy for life."
Robert responded with strong words. Then the ceremony and wedding reception proceeded smoothly, and it was time for me to read my letter.
Daniel and Karen have always been kind to me. I lost my real mom to illness when I was in elementary school. So, perhaps I always longed for a mom in my heart. Both of you welcomed me warmly as if I were your own daughter.
At that moment, the lights in the venue suddenly went out, and the room was enveloped in darkness. I thought it was a power outage, but then the doors in front opened, and a giant screen lit up with a bright light, showing a woman smiling brightly. Huh? Mom. The image was of my late mom. Is it recording properly? Are you filming this?
Yes, it's working. I think. Which button do I press?
I heard Dad's voice, unchanged from the present.
David, get it together. Oh, Nancy. Can you hear me?
Mom in the video waved at me with a beautiful smile.
Is Dad doing the housework properly? He's not slacking off, is he? Are the kids studying diligently? Dad is clumsy, so he might be causing trouble for the kids, but please take care of yourself and do your best at work.
From the family seats, Dad shouted.
I'm doing just fine without you telling me.
And the venue burst into laughter.
And Nancy. If you're watching this video, does that mean a wonderful prince is by your side now? Nancy, congratulations on your wedding. Groom, thank you for marrying Nancy. Since Nancy chose you, I'm sure you're a wonderful man. Groom, please take good care of Nancy for a long time. I will.
Robert promised firmly.
And to the groom's parents, I have a request. My daughter has no mother, so there may be shortcomings. But please watch over her warmly. By the time this video is played, I won't be in this world. But my only wish is for Nancy to be happy. Please fulfill that wish for me. I'm counting on you.
Mom's voice trembled with tears.
Nancy, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely be happy. I'll always be watching over you from heaven.
Dad's face filled the screen as he filmed.
I'll take care of our daughter.
With Dad's strong words, the video ended. When the lights came back on, Robert stood up. He took a deep breath and, facing my mom in heaven, said, I promise to make Nancy happy. No matter what happens, I will always protect Nancy. The venue erupted in applause and cheers, and the wedding reception ended. My parents-in-law came to the waiting room. Actually, Barbara entrusted us with that video when she was alive. She asked us to show it when her daughter got married.
But we never imagined the groom would be our Robert.
Daniel and Karen laughed heartily. Having become Robert's wife, I moved in with my in-laws, and now we live together like a real family. Since then, with my in-laws' support, I've made it a point to visit my parents' house once a month. The house, which became surprisingly quiet after the 3 daughters left, welcomed me with Dad, whose hair had thinned a bit, smiling awkwardly.
I haven't prepared anything, but I can make some tea.
As Dad boiled coffee in the kitchen. Don't be so formal, we're family, I said, rubbing his shoulders. Nancy. For you to say that to me. Dad seemed to have become more emotional with age. And guess what? I'm pregnant. By this time next year, you'll be a grandpa. Even such trivial conversations made Dad sob. Overwhelmed with emotion, I couldn't help but cry too. Both Dad and I, and my in-laws, are eagerly awaiting the day when a new family member joins us.
Mom, watch over us from heaven. I'm going to build a family as happy as yours.
And Mom's portrait smiled gently as always.
Look, that's my friend's dad.
This happened when I attended my beloved niece Gloria's parents' day. I was shocked to see a couple walking into the classroom. Because the man, cozying up to a woman I didn't recognize, was my own husband, Mike. After talking to Gloria, everything clicked for me. So, that's what it was all about. I'll never forgive this. As Mike was about to leave the classroom, I blocked his way, putting on a smile. Let's continue to get along as families, shall we? Please, stay with us until the end to see the turmoil that unfolds from here. My name is Emily, I'm 33 years old, and we're a dual-income couple in our 5th year of marriage. My husband's name is Mike. We met in a sort of half-set-up situation. My parents, who I met later in life, became good friends with Mike's parents, and we first met at a family dinner we were all invited to. Mike made the first move, and that's how our dating began. After a year and a half of dating, when we decided to marry, both sets of parents were thrilled. Everyone around us congratulated us, saying we were a perfect match. At that time, my close sister Flora also attended from afar, bringing along her then 1-year-old daughter Gloria, and I remember feeling so happy. 5 years later, I was still living with Mike, busy with work. Mike would say he's busy with work, coming home late on weekdays, and increasingly, his precious weekends were spent working. With Mike off and away, I found myself spending more time alone. I wish we had kids. That thought crossed my mind, and I shook it off. Actually, not long after we got married, Mike dropped a bombshell on me. I, actually, can't have children. The hospital test results he showed me clearly stated that. Since when did you know? I knew before we got married. But I thought if I told you, you might not marry me. Please, Emily, I don't want our parents to know about this. Keep it a secret. Mike had always said he loved kids and wanted a daughter someday. Knowing that, I felt deeply sorry for him at that moment. We'll take care of each other instead of having kids. Let's live our lives together. With those words from Mike, I nodded and resigned myself to giving up on the idea of having children. Now, 5 years later, did Mike keep his word? No, he didn't. Saying he's busy and tired, leaving all the household chores to me despite being a dual-income couple, without ever showing appreciation, his attitude towards me turned increasingly cold. One day, I got a call from Flora. She had moved abroad with her husband right after our wedding, but now that his assignment was over, they were moving back, not too far from us. Gloria was now 6 years old. I had seen her in photos, but this would be our first real interaction since the wedding. I was looking forward to meeting Flora and Gloria again. That night, I tried to tell Mike, who came home late, about Flora's return. Welcome back, Mike. You know, I got a call from Flora today. I'm tired. I don't have time for small talk. Mike looked down at me coldly and quickly went to the bathroom. Left alone, I stood there, feeling lonely. Despite his aloof attitude towards me, Mike left all the troublesome matters for me to handle. Hey! We're going to have a birthday party for Mom. Dad asked me to prepare, so you take care of it. I was left puzzled when he unilaterally said that, but I went ahead and prepared for my mother-in-law, Helen's birthday party, squeezing it into my busy schedule. On the day of the birthday party, Mike, who attended, wore a proud smile as he saw Helen's joy.
This birthday party, I set it all up. All for my dear Mom. Dad, I did good, right?
Despite the fact that he had dumped everything on me, Mike had the audacity to claim the credit, which irked me a bit. However, after the birthday party was over, my father-in-law Nicholas and Helen thanked me. We know it was Emily who prepared everything. Thanks for doing this for Helen. Please continue to take good care of Mike. They were as kind to me as they had been since the day we got married. Despite my growing grievances with Mike, I was grateful for having met Nicholas and Helen. Sometime later, Mike's arrogant behavior only escalated. He wouldn't have a proper conversation with me, yet he always found something to complain about regarding the housework. One morning, an incident occurred.
Hey, Emily! What were you thinking?
Mike yelled at me, his face contorted with anger as I was getting ready to leave for work. What's wrong with you all of a sudden?
You didn't polish my shoes. How am I supposed to go to work like this?
Indeed, Mike had come home after I had gone to bed the previous night, so I hadn't polished his shoes. But, fed up with the mounting stress, I retorted.
They're your shoes. Why don't you take care of them yourself? Stop expecting me to do everything.
In the next moment, I felt a sharp pain on my cheek. It took a second to realize Mike had slapped me.
Mike, did you just hit me? Shut up. There's nothing wrong with disciplining my wife. If you don't want this to happen, do your job as a wife properly.
With that, Mike stormed out of the house. I was left clutching my cheek, collapsing onto the floor.
He's hardly home, acts cold, and now violence. This is too much.
That's when I began to question the meaning of my marriage to Mike. Yet, considering how happy our parents were when we married, and how kind Nicholas and Helen have been to me, I couldn't easily decide to divorce. One day, not long after she had returned from abroad, Flora asked, "Would you come to my daughter's Parents' Day?" Only 2 family members could attend, and Flora's husband couldn't make it because of work. I happily agreed, saying,
"I'll be there."
On the day of the Parents' Day, I went with Flora to Gloria's classroom. We waved back at Gloria, who was happily waving at us. Soon, the lesson started, and I watched from the back corner of the classroom. Then, a couple entered the classroom late. I was shocked when I glanced at them, because the dad was unmistakably Mike. He was there with a blonde woman, dressed flamboyantly, whispering and looking cozy as they started watching the class. I told Flora, and both of us, surprised, tried to stay out of sight from Mike for the time being. At that moment, I discreetly sent a message to someone. As the Parents' Day came to a close, the children started making their way over to their parents. Gloria ran over to Flora, and I bent down to ask her, "Do you know that man over there?"
That's Irene's dad. I saw his picture at their house when we went over to play.
Gloria had been abroad for so long that she didn't remember Mike's face since the wedding when she was 1. At that moment, I understood everything. So that's what it was. I will never forgive this. As Mike, the woman, and a child named Irene were about to leave the classroom, I blocked their path, forcing a smile in front of the child.
Hello. I hear Gloria has been getting along well with you. Thank you for that.
Mike looked at me, his face freezing over. The woman casually replied, "Hello."
Since the kids get along so well, let's all continue to be friendly, shall we? Family style.
Ha! Beside the puzzled woman, Mike started to tremble. Then Flora said, "Since the 2 want to play together, we'll take Irene with us," and quickly whispered something to me as she was leaving. As Flora and the children walked away, it left me, Mike, and the woman. "Come on, Mike, let's go," Johanna said. Yes, excuse us," Mike responded, trying to act like a stranger. I grabbed Mike's arm with a smile, still.
Huh? What are you doing with my husband? And who are you?
I then introduced myself with a serious face. Sorry for the late introduction. I'm Emily. His wife, you know? The woman's face turned pale as she realized the situation. They tried to dash away. But having been in track and field during my school days, I easily caught up and stopped them. At the school gate, Mike gasped.
What? Dad, Mom too?
Yes, the person I emailed during Parents' Day was Nicholas. I had sent him a message asking him to come quickly to Gloria's school. Seeing Nicholas and Helen, Mike gave up trying to escape and collapsed. Nicholas, Helen, and I put Mike and the woman in the car and headed to the in-laws' house. In the living room of the in-laws' house, with the two seated side by side, I confronted them. So, why were you at Parents' Day?
It was nothing. She's just an acquaintance. A single mother who asked me to act as a father figure, nothing more.
But Gloria mentioned there are family photos of you at her house. Do you usually take family photos with just acquaintances? You don't need to lie so blatantly. Mike, resigning himself, began to explain. The woman's name was Johanna. He had been involved with her before we met. Johanna worked at a night bar, and thinking Nicholas and Helen wouldn't approve, he kept it hidden. After introducing me to his parents, he broke off the relationship with Johanna. But right after we got engaged, Johanna contacted him saying, "I gave birth to your child." After seeing Irene, I couldn't help but go back to Johanna. I found her so adorable. That's when I asked something that had been bothering me.
You can't have children, right? That medical report was real, wasn't it? That's because...
Mike began to reveal something shocking. Right before our marriage, Johanna had told him, "Don't have children with anyone but this child." And so, Mike had gone through with a vasectomy.
For such a selfish reason, you made me give up on having children. Do you understand how I felt?
Johanna laughed at my angry reproach. "Shut up, loser. Mike loves me."
You are just a pity marriage.
When I asked,
"Is that true, Mike?"
he nodded. I married Mike because Nicholas and Helen liked me, and our parents got along well. I was efficient, took care of the house and personal matters perfectly. So he only ever saw me as a maid. So, a maid, huh?
But now that it's out, there's no helping it.
I'll divorce you.
I have a woman I love and a lovely daughter.
You're no longer needed. That's when Nicholas, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Did you forget why Emily's parents and we got along so well?
Huh?
The truth was, both our parents owned businesses and were in a cooperative relationship. Currently, Nicholas's company's most important client was the company where I now serve as a department head, owned by my parents. You might not know since you were sent to work at a friend's company for training, but if we lose the business with Emily's company, we won't survive. It was then revealed that Nicholas had always told Mike, "You'll take over someday, so keep up with the company's affairs." But Mike, not taking it seriously, was unaware that my parents' company was the most crucial client.
So, I intended to leave the company to you, but now there may not be a company to inherit. More importantly, we're disowning you. I never want to see the face of such a foolish son again.
As Nicholas declared disownment, Mike started to panic, begging Nicholas and Helen. But Nicholas and Helen firmly refused him. At that moment, I received an email on my mobile phone. Checking it, I smirked. So, Johanna.
How's Irene's real dad doing? Huh?
I confronted them with a photo of Johanna, heavily pregnant and looking cozy in a childbirth class with a brown-haired man unknown to me. You seemed quite close to this man during your pregnancy. Where did he go?
How do you have that?
I explained that when Flora took the children away, I had asked her to gather any information she could on this woman. Flora, using her network of mom friends, managed to get this photo. According to her mom friend,
this man used to accompany her to every prenatal checkup. I thought he was the new husband Mike knew about.
Hearing this, Johanna's face grew paler and paler. Mike was visibly shaken by the photo. No wonder, since the man in the picture and Irene looked remarkably alike.
Hey, Johanna! What's going on? This man looks exactly like Irene.
When I pressed her to tell the truth, Johanna seemed to resign herself and began to speak. She admitted to two-timing while with Mike, and said that she got pregnant right after they broke up, but after the child was born, they had a big fight, and he left. She thought it would be best to claim the child was Mike's, the prospective company president's, to monopolize Nicholas's inheritance, so she convinced Mike to have a vasectomy.
You're kidding! I believed in you and became incapable of having kids.
Mike shook Johanna's shoulders in disbelief, but she just turned pale and said nothing. Then Mike approached me.
I'm sorry, Emily. I was deceived by this woman. You said you'd stay with me even if we couldn't have kids. Let's start over. I only love you.
Huh?
Didn't you just say I was no longer needed?
Who's the maid? Mike was at a loss for words, so I declared.
We're getting a divorce. And I'll be suing both of you for adultery, so be prepared.
As Mike broke down crying, I told him.
Never show your face to me again.
I left Mike and Johanna to their ugly argument and walked away. Eventually, my divorce from Mike was finalized. I received $40,000 in alimony from Mike and $20,000 from Johanna. Nicholas and Helen, having disowned Mike and deeply apologized, persuaded my parents to continue the business dealings. They informed the president of the company Mike was supposed to inherit that they were leaving Mike's fate in their hands. Consequently, Mike, who had never been serious at work, was fired. Johanna moved away with her child and returned to night work, likely struggling with debts incurred from paying me alimony. After separating from Johanna and depleting his savings, jobless Mike lived alone in a showerless apartment, desperately job hunting. As for me, 3 years after leaving Mike, I remarried a sincere man I met through work, who treats me kindly, and we were blessed with the child I had always wished for. We're now looking forward to meeting our baby, enjoying each day happily. Can you lend me some money to go to the hospital? In the middle of the night, 8-year-old Owen came to our house. Moreover, he was limping in pain. It's over an hour's walk for an adult to our place. What on earth happened? Looking closer, various parts of his body were scraped, and he was bleeding. Exhausted and in pain, Owen's eyes were vacant, as if he might collapse at any moment.
Absolutely not.
My husband shouted at the innocent child. He was very angry and went somewhere. And then, I was shaken to my core by my husband's unexpected action. I am Kate, 60 years old. I lived with my husband, Raymond. Our son and his wife lived in the next town, about an hour's walk from our house, making a car essential for travel. Phil's wife, Linda, is 6 years younger than him, and they have an 8-year-old grandson, Owen. Until now, Phil often brought Owen to our house, so I had been taking care of Owen since he was a baby. On the other hand, Linda rarely came over and had told Phil, "Bring him here." However, it seems Linda has been devoted to housework and childcare, wanting to make some free time for her from now on. Moreover, Phil said, Linda is very domestic and takes good care of us, satisfied with their current family situation. There's no way to intervene, even as a mom. I told myself, letting them do as they wished. But I had no idea such a tragedy would strike us later. It was when Phil was promoted and decided to work abroad half a year ago. Phil, who hates being away from his family, wanted to leave Japan with his family. However, Linda objected. I told myself, letting them do as they wished. But I had no idea such a tragedy would strike us later. It was when Phil was promoted and decided to work abroad half a year ago. Phil, who hates being away from his family, wanted to leave Japan with his family. However, Linda objected.
Owen has just started elementary school and has friends. It's cruel to make him transfer.
Of course, Phil tried to persuade her. But Linda insisted, and with a heavy heart, he left for abroad alone. And sadly, at the same time, Owen stopped coming to our house. I have repeatedly asked Linda to let Owen visit, but each time she made up excuses to refuse. Still not giving up, I pleaded over the phone just to see him for a moment. Then Linda, raising her voice, ranted at me.
It's hard enough without Phil. I can't stand having to worry about you too. Are you trying to monitor me?
No, that's not it at all. Just a short time at the doorstep, I just want to see Owen's face.
Don't you understand I don't want that? If you keep pestering me, I'll tell Phil and have him scold you.
After saying that, Linda abruptly hung up. Sigh, it seems like nothing will help. Maybe that's just how a son's wife is. Phil had emailed me that his new job was demanding, cutting into his sleep time. Not wanting to cause Phil any more worry, I decided to wait to see Owen until Phil returned home. And before I knew it, more than half a year had passed since I last saw Owen. Raymond and I, missing seeing Owen's face, looked at his photos every day to distract ourselves. Raymond's favorite was a group photo from Owen's entrance ceremony. According to Raymond, Owen's anxious face was adorable. One evening, just as the clock struck 9 p.m., the sound of the house doorbell rang suddenly, so I opened the front door. "Can you lend me some money to go to the hospital?" What a surprise, 8-year-old Owen had come.
What happened to you?
"My leg hurts, and I can't sleep at night, so I decided to go to the hospital myself. But this is all I have." When Owen slowly opened his palm, there were 3 dimes. Apparently, he had walked here, dragging his leg in pain, for over an hour. "I fell on the way," said Owen, whose knees were scraped and bleeding. But no matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't understand. I decided to slowly listen to his story and invited Owen into the house for now. Then, at that moment, Raymond, who had been silent until then, suddenly spoke up.
Absolutely not. What are you saying? Are you out of your mind? Owen is in so much trouble.
Angry at Raymond's cold attitude, I grabbed his sweater with both hands and shook him. However, Raymond pulled my hands away with great force and, with a face like a demon, left the house without saying anything. "It's because I came. I'm sorry. I'll go home now." Owen, completely shrunken, turned his back on me and reached for the doorknob. "Owen, don't worry about Grandpa. I'll take you to the hospital myself, so no need to worry." I immediately called an ambulance and at the same time, I called Linda. But I couldn't get through to her, and my texts weren't even read. 20 minutes later, while all this was happening, the paramedics finally arrived. Owen was taken to a nearby hospital, and I accompanied him. Afterwards, Owen was diagnosed with a fracture by the doctor. He was treated and instructed to rest at home. What is Linda doing at a time like this? Even at this point, I couldn't get in touch with Linda, so I decided to take Owen back to our house. "Would you like something warm to drink? You used to like tea with honey, didn't you? I'll prepare it now, so please sit in that chair and wait." As soon as we arrived home, I filled the kettle with water and turned on the stove. Then, Owen suddenly came close to me. "Oh dear, you should be sitting still." "It's not that, Grandma. You see." At this moment, I was told an astonishing truth by Owen. Owen, having confessed everything, had big tears in his eyes. "So that's what happened. It must have been hard for you. But you can rest easy now." I hugged him gently, as if wrapping him in warmth. And then, I was informed of a certain event by an unexpected person.
Those who made Owen go through this will not get away with it.
A flame of revenge ignited within me. The next day at noon. Finally, Linda answered the phone. "Owen has fractured his leg and was seen at the hospital. Now, he's at our place. Apparently, resting at home and eating nutritious food will help him heal faster." Then, "Kate, please continue to take care of Owen for a while. You must be happy to be able to look after Owen so much since you haven't been able to see him until now, right?" I just said, "Understood," and hung up. I had no intention of sending Owen back to that house. Even if Linda had said, "I'm coming to pick up the child now," I planned to keep Owen with me by any means, so Linda's response was exactly what I wanted. However, I felt anger at her attitude as a mother. But I didn't want to get unnecessarily confrontational and spoil the plan. In the meantime, as I supported Owen, I ran around preparing for retaliation, and finally, everything was ready. "All right, watch out. Today, right here, I'll bring you down." A week after Owen came to stay with us, I left him at home to look after himself for a bit while I, accompanied by someone, made a surprise visit to Linda's place.
What is this about? Showing up out of the blue. Please, just go home.
I had gotten a key to their house from Owen. Ignoring Linda's protests, I began to look around the room. Was someone here just before we arrived? I noticed that, although the room was generally tidy, the sheets on the bed in the bedroom were unusually disheveled.
Enough of this. I'll call the police if I have to.
Oh, Linda, you really think you're in any position to say that? I've heard everything from Owen. Leaving him all alone while you're out at night, I see. He was told not to tell anyone. What Owen had tearfully told me before was about this very issue. According to him, one day, feeling lonely and scared because he was sick, he tried to stop Linda from going out at night by standing in the doorway with his arms outstretched. But you just pushed him aside and left anyway. He hurt his ankle when he fell. Linda always told Owen,
Don't you dare tell Dad or anyone about what happens at home, or you'll go without food.
But that day, unable to bear the pain any longer, Owen thought, maybe Grandpa and Grandma can help somehow. So, relying on his memory, he limped all the way to our house.
If you have money for luxury brands, you should at least take Owen to the hospital.
When I opened the closet, it was packed with obviously expensive bags and clothes. Owen had confided in me. Mom always has nice clothes and bags, but she doesn't care about me. It was clear Linda's possessions were all high-end and flashy.
The loneliness without Phil, you're trying to fill it with shopping. That's also on your son, you know.
Linda, veins throbbing with anger, pointed her finger at me. Then, suddenly, a low voice boomed from behind me.
Shut up! I've seen the affair with my own eyes.
The voice belonged unmistakably to Raymond. He had stormed Linda's home with me. That day Owen came to us seeking help.
Not lending it!
Raymond had shouted before storming off, leaving me initially infuriated. However, his anger was actually directed at Linda. Overwhelmed by fury, he had blurted out without thinking. Raymond had headed straight for Linda's house after leaving ours.
I saw you getting into a car driven by a man at that very moment. And I knew he was Owen's first-grade teacher.
Raymond had memorized the face of the teacher who had been in charge of Owen's class from looking at the school photo every day. After Owen revealed the truth to us, we were informed about Linda's secret rendezvous with Owen's former teacher.
I heard from the affair partner that you always dressed provocatively for parent-teacher meetings and aggressively flirted with him.
I confronted the former teacher based on Raymond's testimony. The affair partner admitted that despite knowing it was wrong, he gave in to Linda's temptations when Owen moved to a different class. The former teacher expressed remorse and readily agreed to pay the compensation. He had already submitted his resignation and promised never to see Linda again, planning to return to his hometown.
You stayed in Japan because you couldn't bear to part with him under the guise of for the child's sake, didn't you? Well, that's...
Linda faltered, caught off guard. I assumed that she hadn't taken Owen to the hospital after pushing him because she feared being discovered. And perhaps she thought Phil would cut her allowance if he found out, which is why she didn't take Owen to the hospital. Then, likely because I had accurately pinpointed the truth. Linda couldn't hide her agitation. However, after a brief pause, she defiantly claimed,
If I beg Phil, he'll surely forgive me.
Haha, he really loves me.
Linda, enough is enough. Phil, when did you get back?
Phil, having been informed by me, had hurried back to verify the truth with his own eyes. Believing Linda wouldn't show her true self in his presence, he secretly observed everything from the shadows.
I've heard it all. I can't forgive you. Your behavior towards Dad and Mom is too appalling. I want a divorce. Wait a minute. It was just a lapse in judgment. Plus, Owen is only 8. He needs his mom. I just visited Owen at the hospital, and he's made it clear he doesn't need a mom like you.
Even after receiving such a decisive blow from Phil, Linda desperately begged for reconciliation. But Phil steadfastly refused. Linda then turned to me with a fierce look, baring her teeth.
You've made him leave me because of your meddling. How do you plan to take responsibility for this? That's on you. Besides, I heard you've always seen Phil as nothing but an ATM.
I had been sniffing around Linda, checking if she had any secrets by going through the wedding guest list and making calls.
And I'll be sure to inform your parents about all of this, so be prepared. Stop! My dad hates dishonesty. If he finds out about this, I'll be disowned. Then who will take care of me?
You're an adult. Why not work for yourself?
No way! I've been living a comfortable housewife life on Phil's salary. I don't want to work now. It's too humiliating.
Faced with Linda's selfishness, both Raymond and Phil were dumbfounded, speechless. You'd better experience some hardship and reflect on your actions. Can't you do something? I'm sorry. I really am remorseful. You're the only one I can turn to now. Finally, Linda begged for forgiveness through her tears. However, I simply looked at her coldly, without giving any response. Perhaps thinking she had no other options left. She started to cry out.
I'm so sorry. Please help me.
Right there and then. You know, Owen sought your help many times too. But you ignored all his pleas. Thinking only of yourself is really convenient, isn't it? Hearing my words, Linda broke down crying, but I was unmoved and threw her out of the house. After that, Phil and Linda's divorce was finalized, and Linda was ordered to pay $30,000 in alimony. We also claimed $10,000 from her affair partner, the former teacher. But Linda, having drained her savings, got a job at a night bar only to be fired soon after due to her selfish nature. Currently, she's juggling jobs in road construction and cleaning. Phil still has to work abroad but has promised to return home whenever possible to see Owen. Until Phil returns, we, as a couple, have taken it upon ourselves to care for Owen. Filling the gap of the time we couldn't see him, watching Owen grow has brought true happiness to Raymond and me. Then, don't leave the TV on, and either turn off the lights in the living room or your room. Got it, got it. I'll make sure to save energy. I was leaving the house to go shopping far away. Whether I was out or at home, everyone in the family was committed to saving energy, such as not forgetting to turn off lights or setting the air conditioner to the right temperature. Today, as usual, I went out after reminding each other in the family. However, when I returned a few hours later, my beloved home had completely changed. If you love saving that much, I'll save energy for you. The malicious laughter of my sister-in-law echoed. She had sneaked in and turned off our home's main breaker, causing a major problem. The reason she did such a thing was, my name is Nicola. I'm 29 years old, living in my in-laws' house after marrying James, who is the same age as me. My mother-in-law has passed away, and my father-in-law, David, who has a chronic respiratory condition, was living alone in his house. Concerned about his health, James persuaded me to move in and live together while I continued to work. In the in-laws' house, there's also Amelia, James's unmarried sister, with whom I've had a hard time getting along. David is gentle and kind, much like James. On the other hand, Amelia has a rough temperament and is prone to emotional ups and downs. Being straightforward, I've had several clashes with her, and it's been somewhat of an effort to keep her in check since I'm a few years older. Aside from Amelia, it was a peaceful life. However, within half a year, David's illness worsened. He needed an oxygen concentrator to stay at home. Since both Amelia and I were working, we couldn't be there during the day to help David if needed. We should have arranged for him to move into a care facility for a more secure living environment, but David refused to leave the in-laws' house filled with memories of my mother-in-law. After consulting with James, we concluded that forcibly moving David would be detrimental to his health and cruel. So, we decided to hire a home caregiver, but problems arose here too. Not only did Amelia have a bad relationship with me, but she also disliked the idea of strangers entering her home, and started harassing the caregiver. Moreover, she hurled insults and made sarcastic comments out of our sight. She interfered with their work, and claimed that if they did not meet her expectations, they were unfit to care for David, repeatedly complaining to the agency. We were distressed having several caregivers quit, but when we found out the cause it was too late. The agency informed us they could no longer send anyone, leaving us abandoned. What do we do now?
Other companies have turned us down too. We're probably blacklisted. Damn it! All because of Amelia.
Known for causing trouble, we couldn't hope for any more home caregivers. We sighed and had no choice but to think of a solution. Amelia was inherently selfish and isolated from the family. James, as her brother, tried to correct her behavior, but it only led to fierce arguments, and he even told her to move out and live independently. However, Amelia was infuriated by being scolded in such a manner and started lashing out at me, easier to confront than James.
You're married now, so Nicola should take care of it. My brother can't quit his job because he's a man, but you're different.
Hearing this, James would argue with Amelia again. This situation didn't allow David to focus on his recovery. I didn't like complying with Amelia's demands, but there was no choice. David, despite his illness, always tried to be cheerful and made efforts so I wouldn't feel out of place. Feeling indebted to David, I said, "I'll quit my job to take care of David. I'll start studying caregiving bit by bit. After all, David is family to me." Deciding to retire for caregiving, David and James expressed their gratitude with tears. Caregiving was completely new to me, and it was hard at first, but David always encouraged me gently. The only thing that didn't change was Amelia. She never moved out or helped with household chores or caregiving. On her days off, she would disappear to go out and have fun. Though I now have more time available, there's still the matter of caring for David and studying caregiving. James and I shared the household chores, but whenever there were imperfections, Amelia was quick to criticize.
Oh, wasn't it Nicola who decided to take on both caregiving and housework? You like doing everything by yourself, don't you?
If I retorted even slightly, she'd hit back with sarcasm. She harassed me this way, but James and the others would quickly find out and scold her repeatedly. Each time, she would play the victim, saying, "Dad's too kind to say anything. I'm just speaking up on his behalf." Of course, there was no improvement, and her interference only served to interrupt my work, quickly leading to stress accumulation. I'm truly grateful to the home caregivers who managed to smile through Amelia's persistent behavior. Not just me, but David and the others were also weary of Amelia's stubborn attitude. However, on a day James and I were discussing how to encourage her independence. "I've got a fiancé now, so I'm moving out. Bye, Dad. I'll come back to visit sometimes." With that, Amelia left the house quite abruptly. We were stunned, but with her departure, the atmosphere at home stabilized. Although there was talk of David moving to a care facility due to his age and condition, I was getting accustomed to caregiving, so we decided to continue with it at home. Amelia, now living with her fiancé's family, frequently returned to her childhood home. "There'll be leftovers from dinner tonight, right? Put them in a storage container. I'll take them home with me." It seemed she was relying on our leftovers to avoid preparing meals for her fiancé. Her selfish nature was intact, treating me like a housekeeper as before.
"Amelia, don't order Nicola around without offering to help yourself."
Yeah, sorry, Nicola."
"All right then, hurry up with dinner, will you?"
David's admonishments seemed to go unheard, merely brushed aside. To be honest, the amount of food I prepared hadn't changed since she left, so that wasn't really an issue. The real problem was the increased expenses on groceries and utilities. Despite moving out, Amelia stopped contributing financially but frequently returned to do as she pleased, leading to higher outlays. Moreover, she had no concept of saving energy or money.
"Amelia, please turn off the lights in rooms you're not using. And about the shower, can I use it first if you're not going to?"
Amelia was lounging on the couch, her back to the TV that was left on, engrossed in her mobile phone game. She had turned on all the lights in the bathroom and dressing area, intending to take a shower, but showed no signs of moving. Her lingering here was causing a delay for others. When asked to decide between gaming or showering, Amelia glared at me irritably. Fine.
I was about to go now.
Can you not bother me?
Always on about saving and conserving, are you dumb?
It's not like it makes that much of a difference, being so stingy over small things.
Amelia, watch your language.
Yeah, sorry. David scolded, and she retorted. Finally, Amelia turned off the TV and headed to the bathroom. She complained, but at least she listened to what we said. Though being years into her career and engaged, her attitude remained that of a rebellious teenager. I had long stopped expecting her to act her age. Though it was not a concern, my relationship with Amelia remained tense, even after she left home. I thought saving and conserving could be a common ground for our family, but that proved difficult. One day, I was driving to a large shopping mall in the suburbs. I was tasked by David with running errands. David isn't unable to go out, but he needs to carry a portable oxygen tank when he does. For David, in his old age, carrying a heavy tank was bothersome, even if it had a carrier, and moreover it was all too visible with the nasal cannula. Tired of being pitted every time he met someone he knew, David preferred staying home. David asked for us to run errands for him many times, but James usually took care of these tasks when he was home. I was careful not to leave David alone, but this time our schedules didn't align, and I had to leave David behind. I was worried, but it's not like David couldn't manage on his own. He needed the tank because breathing didn't come easily, but he could still do a lot on his own. While it's important to save electricity, I asked him to use the air conditioning as needed, and with that, I headed out to shop. After completing the shopping without any issues, I returned to our home's parking lot a few hours later. It was late afternoon, although I had left in the late morning. Before entering the house, I checked my mobile phone. Sometimes James contacts me about dinner plans. But what I saw on the screen surprised me. There were countless missed calls. The callers were James, David, and the general hospital David attends. A cold sweat broke out on my back. When driving, I switched my phone to a mode where it wouldn't ring. Planning to return quickly today, I forgot to switch it back before shopping, and hadn't realized calls were coming in. A sense of foreboding washed over me. I tried to call James first, but the phone just rang multiple times without connecting. Growing more anxious, I tried David's number next, but there was no response there either. Finally, clinging to a sliver of hope, I called the hospital. A receptionist answered, and trying to suppress my panic, I inquired about David.
He's currently admitted. We can't discuss details over the phone, so could you please come in?
After being transferred through several departments, I was informed of this and became paralyzed. I quickly replied that I was on my way, hurriedly turned the car key, and restarted the engine. In the car, I was frantic. As if materializing my fears, the roads were congested. David had been fine when I left, waving me off as usual. Why would he suddenly need to be hospitalized? I deeply regretted leaving him alone. Upon arriving at the hospital, I was directed to David's room. Walking down the increasingly tense corridor, I quietly opened the door to find James already seated there. We looked at each other in surprise. However, James explained that he was at the hospital first, waiting for David's tests, which is why he couldn't answer the phone. I too had been driving, unable to respond to calls.
Sorry for not answering the phone. No, it's okay. So, how is David doing?
Prompted by him, I looked over at David sleeping in the bed. His complexion seemed a bit off, but the breathing sounds I was worried about seemed steady.
It's okay, there's no issue with his condition. He's just admitted for some tests. Actually,
hearing from James that David wasn't in danger finally put me at ease. So, why was David admitted? Just as I was about to ask this question, the door to the room burst open. It was Amelia, rushing in. Her eyes were filled with terror, ignoring us and rushing straight to David's bedside. Seeing him lying there, she screamed loudly.
"Ah! What has happened to Dad?"
James hurried to calm her down. But her panicked cries continued to echo in the room.
"Please, calm down."
James tried to pull her away from the bed. Her voice, initially fearful, gradually quieted down, but then she suddenly turned to me, glaring and shouting with raw emotion.
You were with him. What happened?
Her accusations struck me, leaving me speechless. James intervened to calm things down, but her anger was still directed at me. Confused, I was caught in a strange sensation. David needed oxygen, but such a sudden hospitalization seemed unlikely.
Wait. Can't we talk about this calmly?
James turned back to us with a quiet tone, starting to explain what he knew. David was transported here because the oxygen concentrator's power was cut off. After I left, David was sleeping in his room when the power went off. He woke up feeling suffocated and tried to turn the machine back on, but it wouldn't work, and he couldn't reach me or James. David connected himself to a portable tank to catch his breath, but was anxious about waiting alone without knowing when we would return. David, struggling with a headache, decided to go to the hospital, but since we usually drove, he had no way to get there. He then attempted to call a taxi, but his hands trembled so much that even making a call became difficult. So, David went to ask a neighbor to call a taxi for him. Upon stepping outside, the neighbor screamed at the sight of David. They took him to the living room, laid him down, and applied copious amounts of ice while calling an ambulance. It was then that David realized he was suffering from heat stroke. Thanks to timely treatment at the hospital, his condition stabilized and he was safe. According to what James heard from the doctor, David, perhaps due to his age, had a diminished ability to feel heat, and he didn't realize that his trembling hands and headache were symptoms of heat stroke, rather than old age. He also had convulsions, so immediate treatment and hospitalization were necessary. Hearing James's explanation, I couldn't help but express my doubts.
The power for the device not coming on. It's hard to believe the plug could have come loose. We installed it in a place where it couldn't be accidentally unplugged, right?
James frowned, deep in thought. Amelia remained silent. However, her face was visibly pale.
That's correct. It couldn't have come unplugged on its own. I went back to check, and indeed, the plug was still in. Then how?
I was even more confused by James's words. He had returned home to prepare for the hospital stay, and noticed the power was off, but the plug was still connected. He then looked sternly at Amelia. Her pallor suggested she was hiding something, but it was unclear why James was so angry. Suddenly, James raised his voice at Amelia.
You turned off the breaker, didn't you? Say something.
As James's voice echoed in the room, Amelia started trembling, struggling to speak but only managing to utter incoherent sounds. Then James took something out of his pocket. The hospital had tried to contact me, James, and Amelia several times, but James was the first to connect. Returning home to prepare, James immediately felt something was off upon entering. He was greeted by an unbelievable heat wave. Noticing the hall light didn't work, James checked around the house and found all appliances stopped. Rushing to the breaker, he found it switched to OFF, as he suspected. James was stunned and suspicious. Why would this happen? There was no report of lightning or any incident that could cause the breaker to trip. Other homes were unaffected, with no reports of power outages. However, James remembered something important. Our home had several security cameras installed. This was before I married James, insisted by David after a burglary, for his wife's peace of mind. Despite our commitment to saving, the cameras were kept for our safety. The footage before the power outage should be available. Rushing to restore power, James checked the records.
I've got the footage here. I wanted to show both of you, so I transferred it.
James took out his mobile phone in the hospital room and showed us the transferred footage. The first scene was our familiar home entrance. Some time after I left, Amelia made her appearance. It was the first time I knew she had come to the house, and I couldn't help but glance at her next to me. She used her own key to open the front door and enter. The usual noise was absent. Instead, she looked around, as if searching for something. It was almost as if she was checking to see if I wasn't there. James started operating his mobile phone, now switching to the footage from a camera inside the entrance. Our home's circuit breaker is located near the ceiling of the shoe cabinet. Amelia climbed onto the chair placed for sitting while wearing shoes and opened the cover of the breaker.
What are you doing?
Even though I knew what was happening, I couldn't suppress such a scream. The camera had a voice recognition system that starts recording when it detects sound, so it recorded not just the sounds of Amelia moving but also her chilling whispers.
This is the breaker, right? If the fridge stops, that penny pincher will calm down a bit, won't she?
A maliciously laughing voice echoed in the quiet, silent hospital room.
Look, I'm saving energy, just like you love to do.
After she turned off the breaker, the footage ended. We were at a loss for words, standing frozen in place. Turning off the breaker would, of course, stop the power supply throughout the house. For the several hours until James noticed, the contents of the fridge must have turned into a disaster, just as she planned. From the way she rushed into the hospital room, it seemed she hadn't realized her actions could endanger David's life, but to punish me, it was too cruel. Yet, she took an action I could never have imagined.
I did it because you're always nagging about saving energy.
She started to raise her voice in an attempt to justify herself, tears welling up in her eyes.
I didn't know Dad was home. I thought you went out together. It's your fault for leaving him behind. I didn't think this would happen,
she repeated. Contrary to her tearful self-defense, my heart was ablaze with anger.
Sneaking in like a thief and turning off the breaker, it's miraculous he survived. If something had happened to David,
I couldn't help but blame Amelia, but she raised her voice even louder to blame me.
But it's your fault. You shouldn't have left Dad. It's all because of you.
Her accusation pierced my heart. Indeed, I shouldn't have left David behind. Leaving him behind, saying that going far would be a burden, was perhaps my mistake. As the hospital room filled with tension, suddenly it was shattered.
Quiet down.
David, who we thought had been asleep, rebuked her. He couldn't raise his voice much due to his illness. Being naturally gentle, we were all shocked. All three of us turned our gazes to him.
Do you understand what you've done? Causing trouble for everyone, almost killing your father. Nicola isn't to blame.
David's eyes were filled with anger and disappointment. His tone was much stricter than his usual gentle demeanor. Woken up by Amelia's screaming and the commotion, he had woken up and heard everything, including the surveillance camera footage.
If you're going to keep making noise, leave. And don't ever come back to the house.
After being scolded, Amelia turned pale, frozen in place, but then she suddenly started crying. And rather loudly, which was very annoying. Amelia was apologizing to David, but James said, "Leave, you're a nuisance." And she was driven out of the hospital room. David was discharged just a few days later. When James and I went to pick him up from the hospital, he greeted us with a relieved smile, apparently feeling better. But upon returning home, Amelia was waiting at the entrance. She hadn't shown herself to us since that incident. We were expecting an apology, but what came out of her mouth were the same words as before.
It's your fault. Everything that happened to Dad is all because of you.
David and James could only wear expressions of utter disbelief. David stepped forward towards Amelia, unwilling to admit fault and still trying to push the blame onto me.
Be grateful we're not taking you to the police just because you're family. Your actions are absolutely unforgivable.
David's cold voice, unchanged even outside the hospital room, made her fall silent. But David didn't stop there. He had come to despise her from the bottom of his heart.
I'm disowning you. I can't believe you still don't understand the seriousness of what you've done. As I said at the hospital, never come to our house again.
With those harsh words, he brushed past Amelia and entered the house. She probably never imagined being disowned by her father. She stood there, dumbfounded. We sided with David's anger, deciding to support him. So, we left her outside and went back into the house. Afterward, Amelia sent numerous apologies. But David ignored them all. Having been caused so much trouble, we had no sympathy for her and maintained our stance. David had been asked to financially support Amelia's wedding and honeymoon, but he refused all requests and firmly stated he would not attend the wedding. One day, I was ambushed outside our house by her. She desperately apologized and pleaded with me to persuade David, but I had already decided not to forgive her. Knowing ignoring her would only make her more persistent, I quietly listened to everything Amelia had to say, then left her there and walked away. This series of events eventually became known to Amelia's fiancé. David had declined attending the wedding for safety reasons, but the fiancé, puzzled by this, reached out to David. It turned out she had twisted the story to suit herself, but upon hearing about the breaker incident that led to David's emergency transport, the fiancé apologized to David in a panicked frenzy. The fiancé was sensible, unlike Amelia. Calling her actions akin to attempted murder, their marriage was ultimately called off. The lease for their new home was cancelled before they could move in. Amelia was kicked out of the fiancé's house, but she had already quit her job in anticipation of getting married. Thanks to expenses on beauty treatments and salons in preparation for the wedding, her savings were nearly gone. And with the wedding venue already booked for the imminent event, she had to cover half of the cancellation fees. She ended up struggling with debt due to her own actions, but thankfully didn't show up at our place anymore. Meanwhile, the three of us have been living peacefully. Perhaps because we're no longer being disturbed and hurt by Amelia, David's condition has improved more than before. While we can't be careless because of his age, it seems we won't need to consider nursing home admission for a while. In fact, we're even planning a trip.